There's a lot of things I remember, but some you never forget, no matter how old you get.
My name is William Thompson, but everyone calls me Bill. I'm 99 years old. When I was 19, I served in World War II and shot down a German fighter plane. Back then, I thought that was the greatest thing I'd accomplished in the war. But looking back now, what I really learned in war wasn't how to shoot. It was actually the complete opposite. 80 years later, I want to tell you that story. It's probably very different from what you might expect. I was born in Chicago Heights, Illinois. On December 7th, 1941, I heard about the Pearl Harbor attack while I was in high school. Of course, we didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was back then. My family was really poor during the Great Depression. We went hungry a lot. So as soon as I turned 18, I enlisted right away. I dropped out of high school and went to war. I did basic training at Camp Call in La Jolla, California, and for me, it was like heaven. 3 meals a day, warm clothes, a cozy place to sleep. It was the best life I'd ever known. Basic training in World War II was straightforward. They weren't training plumbers or electricians, just one thing: how to kill enemies. I guess I was good at it. They recognized my skills and kept me as an instructor. I got promoted to corporal and later became a drill sergeant. But when they needed 2 more men for an overseas unit, my buddy and I volunteered. That's how I got assigned to the 575th Anti-Aircraft Artillery at Fort Bliss, Texas. It was a self-propelled artillery unit. I learned to operate the M16 and M15 there. The M16 had 450 caliber machine guns on an electric turret, and the M15 had 2 50 caliber guns and a 37 millimeter cannon on a manual turret. Really complex weapon systems. We sergeants had to master them completely first. Then we had to train the new recruits coming from New York for combat. Learning to operate the weapons took quite a while. We had to practice a little every day, and we spent a lot of time at the firing range in New Mexico. We were specifically trained to shoot down enemy aircraft that was strafing. We started by shooting at target sleeves being towed by planes. Then we practiced on small model aircraft. I was really good at this training. I also taught aircraft identification. I could distinguish enemy planes from friendly ones just by their silhouettes. That's why the M15 half-track had no roof. I had to stand up to identify aircraft and give firing commands. I was really proud. Coming from a poor farming family, gaining recognition for my technical skills in the military gave me confidence. My men followed my orders well, and my superiors trusted me. Most of all, I was satisfied watching the soldiers I personally trained improve their skills. From operating complex anti-aircraft systems to tracking fast-moving aircraft, I could teach them everything they needed to know. Around October 1944, we finally got our overseas deployment orders. We were ready to head to England. We were a well-trained unit, and I was confident we could succeed in any situation. In October 1944, we arrived in Liverpool. We got new equipment there. All the weapons were covered with Cosmoline preservative, so it took some time to clean them and get them ready. Then we headed south to Southampton and boarded landing craft. We crossed the English Channel and landed at Cherbourg, France. It was just before the Battle of the Bulge began. We were deployed to a place called Chaumont, southwest of Bastogne, Belgium. That's where we did most of our fighting. At first, I thought we could handle things just like we learned in training. I had perfectly mastered operating the M15 and M16, and my aircraft identification skills were excellent. But when we actually got to the front lines, something felt different. In training, targets appeared in predictable patterns, but actual combat wasn't like that. German aircraft appeared from unexpected angles. We could detect them by sound first, but we had to start aiming before we could see them over the trees. Artillery attacks were completely different from training, too. When shells actually exploded, they left black marks on the snow, and instead of a boom sound, you felt the powerful pressure of compressed air. It was really scary. That's when I thought something was strange. I'd been perfectly trained, so why did it feel so different? We were assigned to protect other convoys from air attacks. We had to keep moving while using our anti-aircraft guns to fend off enemy planes. One day, I heard an officer on the radio shouting to our artillery, "Increase your range! Increase your range!" Our shells were falling too close to us. I was sitting in the M15 half-track eating a D ration at the time, high-calorie chocolate, but I suddenly threw it away. I had the strange thought, I don't want this to be my last meal. I'd never had thoughts like that in training. Real combat was truly different. Artillery and mortar attacks were the scariest. They were completely unpredictable. You never knew when or where they'd land, so you had to stay tense all the time. I had to direct anti-aircraft fire, standing up to identify aircraft and give firing orders or ceasefire commands was my job. My experience teaching aircraft identification helped here. I could tell whether it was an enemy or friendly plane just by the silhouette. But combat required much faster decisions. When we captured a German airfield, something unusual happened. We took it so quickly that 2 German reconnaissance planes landed not knowing we were there. They naturally became prisoners. These unexpected situations kept happening. We'd never learned about stuff like this in training. Later, 2 of our scouts in an M8 reconnaissance vehicle didn't return. They were from the 41st Cavalry Regiment. The captain told me to take an M15 and go look for them. We had to go deep into enemy territory that morning. We found them eventually. But the reconnaissance vehicle was gone, and both men were shot and stabbed in the throat. We brought the bodies back. That's when I realized that war was much more brutal and unpredictable than I had thought. When the Battle of the Bulge really started, I got hit by shrapnel in my leg. It happened suddenly. In an instant, there was nothing I could do. I was evacuated to a field hospital in France. I had to stay there for 5 weeks. The Battle of the Bulge was so intense that the hospital was packed with wounded soldiers, and the medical staff was frantically busy. After 5 weeks, my wound still wasn't completely healed. It was still bleeding a little, and I had to walk with crutches. But they told me to leave the hospital. More seriously wounded soldiers kept coming in. On my way back to my unit, I stopped at a supply depot. I needed new combat boots. A major there kept me for another week until the bleeding stopped and I could walk without crutches. Finally, I returned to the front lines. But the news I heard when I got back was shocking. The men I had personally trained in America had been wounded or killed. Corporal Fassey was severely wounded in the face but survived, but Corporal Raidsford was killed instantly. It really didn't make sense. I had trained them perfectly. For months in America, I taught them everything from anti-aircraft operation to aircraft identification, everything they'd need in actual combat. But this happened when I wasn't there. Corporal Raidsford was younger than me. He had parents back home and planned to return after the war to help with the family farm. Corporal Fassey was a good friend, too. They said his facial injury would be permanent. It broke my heart thinking about how his family felt when they got that news. All the skills and tactics I had taught them were useless. I realized that no matter how perfectly you prepare in training, unexpected things happen in real combat. I blame myself. Should I have taught them more? Should I have prepared them more thoroughly? Could I have saved them if I'd been there? But I was also angry at the same time. This all seemed so unfair. We had done our best to prepare, but I couldn't understand why this had to happen. I had to admit that war was completely different from what we learned in training. No matter how skilled you were, no matter how perfectly you prepared, there were things you couldn't control. Corporal Raidsford's empty spot kept catching my eye, where he always sat, the weapon he operated, the jokes he used to tell. Everything reminded me of him. Corporal Fassey returned to the unit after recovering from his injury, but he wasn't the same. He had trouble speaking because of his facial wound and was always cautious. That's when I started questioning my leadership. Could I really protect my men properly? Could what I taught them actually save their lives? When I worked as an instructor in America, I was confident. I thought I could control everything. But combat was different. Even the best commander couldn't predict and prepare for every situation. Before falling asleep at night, I kept thinking, what if I had been there? If I had given different orders? If I had positioned them differently? But those thoughts were useless. What was done, and Corporal Raidsford wasn't coming back. I began to realize that war wasn't simply a matter of skill and training. It was something more complex and unpredictable. Still not fully healed, I returned to the front lines, and we began advancing across the German border into the interior. Our destination was a town called Zelis, where they made Walther pistols. While moving toward that location, we constantly had to protect other convoys from air attacks. We were always on the move. There were continuous artillery attacks, too. Artillery attacks were really terrifying. When they exploded, it wasn't a bang sound, but the powerful pressure of compressed air. They exploded, leaving black streaks on the snow. That compressed air pressure was truly frightening. When we captured the town of Zelis, something unusual happened. We took the airfield so quickly that 2 German reconnaissance planes landed, not knowing we were there. The pilots naturally became prisoners. These unexpected situations kept occurring. We'd never learned about things like this in training. One day, 2 of our scouts in an M8 reconnaissance vehicle went out and didn't return. They were from the 41st Cavalry Regiment. The captain told me to take an M15 and go find them. That morning we had to enter enemy territory. We found them eventually. But the reconnaissance vehicle was gone, and both men were shot and stabbed in the throat. We brought the bodies back. What I felt then was that war was much more brutal and unpredictable than I had imagined. One night, we were escorting a supply unit in a valley. My men were all positioned at their anti-aircraft guns when I got on an M15 with one of my corporals. The M15 had a 37mm cannon and 50 caliber machine guns. The trigger was where I stepped with my foot. Then I heard the sound, aircraft sound. You could tell what it was just by the sound. I started aiming before we could see it over the trees. I handled left-right aiming, and the corporal handled elevation. I pressed the trigger. The machine guns fired first. Then the 37mm cannon went off. The second shell exploded in front of the pilot. That was the only enemy aircraft actually shot down. To get official recognition, an officer had to see it hit and crash. We always shot a lot, but that was the only time I got a confirmed hit. But near the end of the war, something strange happened. We heard that the Germans had a new plane called a jet. They said fire came out the back. We had no idea what a jet was. One night, when we were all positioned at our anti-aircraft guns, we heard aircraft sounds, and we saw fire coming from behind. That's got to be a jet, we thought, so we concentrated all our firepower on it. It turned out to be a B-17 bomber with a British crew. One engine was on fire, and they were trying to make an emergency landing. We pumped even more bullets into it. It crashed in the end. That was war. We had to make split-second decisions when we weren't sure if it was enemy or friendly. Later, we met the Russians. They were really tough people. The women were just as tough as the men. Right around that time, the 41st Cavalry Regiment from our division was the first to reach a place called Mauthausen. I wasn't there the first day. They told me to take one M15 from our roadblock and go take a look. But it was still chaos. People were running around everywhere, some crying, some celebrating. The SS had fled, but one didn't escape. The inmates beat him to death. Seeing that scene made me increasingly confused. I wasn't sure what war really was or what we were truly fighting for. I had never heard of Mauthausen before. I didn't even know the word Holocaust. I couldn't even imagine that such things were happening. What I saw when I went there later completely changed my life. From the moment I entered the concentration camp, there was a smell, an indescribable smell, the smell of death. And I saw living skeletons. They were so emaciated you could hardly call them human. Only their eyes, large and sunken, stared at us. There were piles of corpses, stacked like cordwood. So many you couldn't count them. Among the living, many didn't have the strength to stand. Only bones and skin remained. I couldn't understand how people could reach such a state. The scenes I saw walking around the camp were truly shocking. There were crematoriums, still hot. That's where they burned people. There were gas chambers, too, made to look like shower rooms, but they killed people inside. The walls had scratch marks from fingernails. What kind of person could do such things? I truly couldn't understand. How could humans do this to other humans? Among the liberated inmates, some still had anger left. They caught an SS guard who hadn't escaped, and they beat him to death. I didn't stop them. I couldn't have stopped them. Thinking about what those people had suffered, I understood. But at the same time, I was scared. I had seen how brutal humans could be. The SS guards were people too, but how could they do such things? That night, I couldn't sleep. Those scenes kept coming back to me. People starving to death, piles of corpses, gas chambers, crematoriums. When I enlisted at 19, I thought I was fighting for my country. I believed I was defending freedom and democracy. But what I saw at Mauthausen wasn't simply war between nations. It was a fight between humanity and evil. I realized I had thought about war too simplistically. I'd only thought about technology and tactics, victory and defeat. But what really mattered wasn't that. It was human dignity, the right of people to live as human beings. When I shot down that German fighter with my anti-aircraft gun, I was proud. I thought I had won in the war. But now, I wondered if that was really what mattered. Wasn't there something else I really needed to defeat? Among the people in the camp were children not even 10 years old. What crime had they committed to deserve such suffering? There were elderly people, too. Grandfathers and grandmothers who should have been walking with canes were there with only bones and skin left. Until then, I thought war was soldiers fighting each other, but in reality, innocent civilians, even children, were sacrificed. All my certainties crumbled. Everything I thought I knew well turned out to be nothing. I heard that the 41st Cavalry Regiment had to bury 500 bodies there. German civilians had to come help too. Among them were people who said, "We didn't know." Did they really not know, or did they pretend not to know? I was ashamed of myself too. I didn't know either. I had no idea such things were happening. If I had known, what would I have done? Could I really have done something, or would I have pretended not to know too? From that day on, I became a completely different person. I began to think completely differently about what war was, what humans were, and why I was there. Even after the war ended, our mission continued. Many SS members refused to surrender and fled to the mountains of Bavaria, continuing to cause problems. Our squad of 10 men, with an M15 half-track, a mechanic, and a cook, was sent to Bavaria. We stayed for 5 months at a chalet in a mountain village called Walp. It was a lodge where Hitler and his associates had held meetings. For 5 months, we ate at the same table where Hitler had sat. It was a really strange feeling. How many terrible plans had been made at that table? Orders to create places like Mauthausen probably came from here, too. Sometimes I had to go into the mountains with my men in the M15. Whenever we got reports of SS remnants, if they surrendered, we checked for the tattoo on their left arm. All SS members had blood-type tattoos. Then we'd arrest them and send them to work gangs. But if they resisted, we had to shoot them. General Patton had ordered after our soldiers were massacred in the Battle of the Bulge, "Take no more SS alive." Carrying out such missions made me think a lot. Was this revenge or justice? At first, I thought it was revenge. Considering what they had done to our comrades and innocent civilians, it seemed justified. But as time passed, it changed. This wasn't revenge, but work to prevent such things from happening again. What I had seen at Mauthausen kept staying in my mind. Those emaciated people, piles of corpses, the look in children's eyes. How could we prevent such things from happening again? Just winning the war wasn't enough. People needed to regain their dignity as human beings, and we had to make sure that people capable of committing such terrible acts could never gain power again. Every time we arrested SS members, I asked them, "Why did you do such things?" Most answered, "It was orders." They said, "My superiors made me do it." But could that be an excuse? No matter what the orders were, aren't there things humans should never do? That's when I realized it. Real courage wasn't charging despite enemy bullets, but being able to say no to wrong orders. I was a soldier too, so I understood the importance of orders. But I learned that no order was more important than human conscience. Staying at Hitler's lodge, I realized something else too, how dangerous power could be. That luxurious lodge, expensive furniture, beautiful mountain scenery. Everything looked perfect, but the most terrible plans in human history were made in that beautiful place. I learned that people with power could do anything to keep their power. That's why ordinary people like us need to stay awake. Every time I went on mountain patrols with my men, we talked about these things, about why we were here and what really mattered. At first, the young soldiers didn't understand well. To them, war still felt like adventure or heroic tales, but gradually it changed. When I told them what I had seen at Mauthausen and explained why we had to carry out such missions, they began to understand. One day a soldier said to me, "Sergeant, we're really doing good work, right?" I could answer with confidence, "Yes, we're doing the most important work right now." From then on, I knew exactly why I had gone to war. Not for country, not for glory. It was to create a world where people could live with dignity. After returning from Bavaria, I learned more details about what the 41st Cavalry Regiment had done at Mauthausen. The fact that they buried 500 bodies. At first, I just thought it was a terrible job, but as time passed, I came to understand the real meaning of that work. It wasn't simply removing corpses, it was giving those people their final dignity. I heard that German civilians were also made to participate in that work. Many of them said, "We didn't know." But now they knew. They had seen directly the results of what they had pretended not to know. That's when I realized it. Real courage wasn't shooting down enemy planes, but burying the dead with dignity. When I shot down that German fighter at 19, I was really proud. I thought I had finally accomplished something in the war. But that was just the beginning of the war. The really important work happened after that. Liberating Mauthausen concentration camp, caring for survivors, burying the dead with dignity. That was the real victory. War wasn't simply about killing enemies, but about restoring humanity. It was about giving people back their right to live as human beings. I felt greater achievement seeing Mauthausen survivors smile again than when I hit that enemy plane with my M15 anti-aircraft gun. Seeing life return to those people's eyes was the real victory. Seeing them regain hope as human beings. One survivor said thank you to me. Someone who knew a little English. He said, "Thank you for coming." That's when I knew exactly why I was there. Not for glory, not for country. It was for moments like that. There was a child, about 10 years old, looking at me with only bones and skin left, but there was still light in his eyes. I gave that child the de-rationed chocolate I had. The child took it and smiled for the first time. That smile was more precious to me than any medal. It was proof that I had really accomplished something. It was the same when we were mopping up SS remnants in Bavaria. It wasn't simple revenge, but work for the future, making sure such people could never gain power again, making sure things like Mauthausen never happened again. That was the real purpose. One day, a German civilian approached me, an elderly woman. She knelt down and asked for forgiveness. I helped her stand up, and I said, "Now we must move forward. Remember the past, but work together for the future." That's when I felt like I had really become an adult. When I enlisted at 19, I was just a thoughtless boy. But now, it was different. What war taught me wasn't how to destroy, but how to heal. Not how to hate, but how to forgive. Of course, it wasn't easy. I couldn't forget what I had seen at Mauthausen. But I realized I had to turn that memory into hope, not hatred. The German pilot I shot down was probably someone's son, too. His family must have waited for him to come home. In war, everyone is a victim. There aren't separate perpetrators and victims. Everyone is a victim of this terrible situation. That's why, after war ended, reconciliation was needed, not revenge. Understanding and forgiving each other. Among Mauthausen survivors, some wanted revenge too. That was understandable. But real victory was helping them live human lives again, not being trapped in past pain, but finding new hope. That was the real lesson I learned from war. True courage wasn't defeating enemies, but making peace. After the war ended and I returned home, I became a farmer. I raised 9 children and worked 3 jobs for 38 years. In those days, even when life was difficult, we didn't send wives to work. The wife stayed home taking care of children, and the husband took on 2 or 3 more jobs. That was normal. I thought we needed to learn how to work. The government wasn't responsible for our livelihood. We had to solve it ourselves. Even while working on the farm, I didn't forget the lessons I learned in war. Especially what I saw at Mauthausen stayed in my heart for life. As my children grew up, they sometimes asked, "Dad, what did you do in the war?" I always gave the same answer. I did work to protect people's right to live as human beings. I didn't often tell my children about shooting down German fighters. Instead, I told them more about the survivors I met at Mauthausen, because that was the more important story. It was the story that showed the real meaning of war. Looking back now after 80 years, I think I was really lucky. I realized what a great blessing it is to live in a country like this. Young people today don't remember World War II. They were too young to experience those times. But they need to know that there are people who can commit such terrible acts because of their lust for power. There aren't many people left who witnessed the Holocaust. I'm one of them. That's why I'm telling you this story. We must not forget. To prevent such things from happening again, we must remember. I can't forget the look in those children's eyes at Mauthausen. What crime had they committed to deserve such suffering? It's our responsibility to prevent such things from happening again. That's why democracy is important. We've seen what happens when dictators gain power. Hitler did it, and so did Stalin. We must watch those in power. We must stop them from going down the wrong path. And we must respect each other. We shouldn't hate people because they're a different race, different religion, or have different thoughts. The people at Mauthausen were ordinary neighbors at first, too. They didn't suddenly become enemies. Someone made them into enemies. You've seen how dangerous prejudice and hatred can be. That's why education is important. We must help people think correctly. That's what I taught most importantly while raising my children on the farm, too. Working hard is important, but respecting others is more important. I sent all 9 children to college. It wasn't easy, but we did it. I believe that educated people could make the world better. Those children are now adults living their own lives. They're also passing on what I taught them to their children. That's how memory continues. People who didn't experience it directly can learn those lessons too. I'm 99 years old now. I don't know how much longer I'll live, but I wanted to leave this story behind. The most important lesson I learned in war is this: true courage isn't killing enemies, but saving lives. And true victory isn't winning battles, but making peace. We are really lucky people. We can speak freely, think freely, and live freely. But that freedom didn't come by itself. Many people sacrificed to protect it. So we too must protect that freedom for the next generation. That's our duty and responsibility. Learn how to work. Don't depend on the government, but solve things yourself. And live respecting others. That's the most precious lesson I learned in my 99 years of life.